conversation yet.
Yes,
but the Asian American conversation we have is really New York or California based.
It is.
Not based out of the other parts of the US.
One of the first, so I my some flavor to it. Publishing, very long time. So one of the first novels that I tried to sell as an author, it never got picked up by anybody, but it was about an Indian American family in the South, living in North Georgia, as a matter of fact, a place that I frequent with my own family. We love it up there. And I couldn't find, there weren't many Indian American authors writing about the South until the first book that I came across was by Devi Laskar, who wrote The Atlas of Reds and Blues, first novel. She is originally from North Carolina. She is currently living in California, but she was also Atlanta-based for several years and worked here as a reporter. So we have so few, being Indian American Southerners, we have so few, like I can just name this one author, right? I can name your name and I can name Debbie's name and then my name, and then I've just about run out, right?
Yes.
We have a very different cultural existence being based in the Southeast, being based in an area of the country that has a very rich civil rights history.
Yes.
And you're right. We hear about Indian Americans from New Jersey and New York and California and Chicago and even Houston. But very few of us are actually writing about our experiences living here, who are based here.
I just want to make one plug and I'll leave it back to you.
Sorry, a question that came up when she said, I'll go there and said, do you feel and that we as a culture, Americans as community in India, in Atlanta, is still hasn't yet changed the scenario? I mean, we listen a lot about the Black community that's pushing its way. Do you think we as South Asians, especially in the South, have just taken a back seat and not pushed ourselves because we have a lot of people who are, and then we don't get seen as much because, it's kind of a comparative, we have to take care of the Black community first.
Well, before we go into that thing, I just want to say there's one other book that just came out this year, Purple Lotus by Veena Rao, which is very much trying to be a Southern book, an Indian Southern book. She is, however, born and brought up in India, so it's still different than people like us who were formed in the US and who don't get much narrative, as what Ritu was saying. So there's several things that your question, I think, say that's interesting. And parts of it I certainly agree with. I do think that in the current American narrative, there's a narrative of, rather than looking at all the different types of people who've come to make the US home or who have something to do with this country, there tends to be a certain kind of politicization and commodification of the narratives of certain types of people that are seen to be more profitable. So, and every few years it changes. It might be Asian Americans, people from a Chinese background a few years, and then Black Americans, and don't get me wrong, I'm a huge supporter of Black Lives Matter, and I do think that there is an importance to talking about that narrative. But is it that is an actual important thing for people to talk about now? Is it something that's not being commodified by the publishing industry? Is there now this desire now to push all these voices and only these voices because they suddenly saw, these one or two people are really profitable. Now we're just going to just only publish Black authors for some months. You know what I mean? So there is this lack of discussion of all the different ways. What about Mexican Americans or Latin Americans who've had really grueling histories here, who've really suffered in the way people like Dalit people in India have suffered, and they really have suffered, I mean, I'm not saying, and there are ways that Indian Americans have suffered, Vietnamese Americans have suffered. So certainly, I do think there's a truth to that point, but I don't think it necessarily has to come with the devaluation of saying more Black stories. I think there needs to just be more of a willingness to publish all the different types of stories and a willingness to give the right for different people to be a voice and to have their voice heard.
So I think it's a very important question, Ritu. So I am of the perspective that when we are building coalitions with other minority groups in this country, we are not actually erasing or diluting ourselves in any way. We are lifting everybody up together. Mm-hmm. And even though there has been this recognition that Black stories are so important, it's really a fraction of what needs to be done for Black authors in the Black community. So we can lift everybody up together and benefit. The literature will benefit. It will be more rich. It will be more diverse. It will be, it will educate and inform and benefit all of us if we are in fact celebrating and using our purchasing power to buy Black authors, to buy Mexican authors' books, to buy South Asian books, to buy Arab American books. We will all benefit for that coalition building. I feel as if, when we recognize the sort of injustice in the publishing industry, which we actually don't know whether a lot of the recent changes in the publishing industry as a result of the death of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we actually don't know whether these will be long-lasting changes, right? It is encouraging to me that we have had so many Black authored books on the bestseller lists, right? But, I think we should not be, we shouldn't sit back and assume that we are done. And I think we as South Asian authors, we as Indian American authors, can be a part of the systematic change. We can elevate Black authors, and we can also elevate our own stories and the stories of the Latinx and Arab and other Asian American communities. So I think this is, it's about us being a part of this movement. And I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I think we are in a position now where there are more Indian American authors and from other parts of the United States who are writing. And I think this is a golden time now to actually be an Indian American author and to work across other groups and coalitions and ask them, what do you need to have your voice heard in this publishing industry that has been very problematic for a very long time? And when you reach across to other groups, you are in fact also, elevating your own voice and elevating your own community's voice.
So when you were young, and this is more for young adults, right? How do you get inspired? I know there are things that they tell kids in school to journal. What are you supposed to be doing when you're journaling? Because it is a question, like kids just write, oh, I ate this thing, I played my game today, or whatever. How do you make those journals more meaningful, that they become more impactful stories eventually?
So this is a tough question, Ritu. I'm going to be all over the place with it.
Okay.
So first, I want to give my perspective as a parent. I have 3 children. One has now just started college. One is in high school, and one is in middle school, 7th grader. I think, unfortunately, when children go to school, they are taught to approach writing in a way that is similar to approaching every other discipline, science, math. It's very formulaic. It is sort of this is the right way, this is the wrong way. They learn a lot of rules that are really not rules that you use when you get out of formal education to be a writer. It just doesn't happen. Journaling is about figuring out how to empower your voice and put it on a piece of paper, put it on a screen on a laptop. It's perfect in that way, in that form. And it actually doesn't even need to be something greater than that. And I think what happens is I teach graduate school at Reinhardt University. So I am teaching writers who are even my age, who are in their 40s, some are in their 50s. One of my students is just turned 60 recently. And part of the problem is when they come to me, they have spent their formal education, they've spent their life being told that they cannot do this as a writer, that there are rules they need to follow. You can't write this, you can't say this, you can't do it in this way and do it in that way. And most of that is false. And so what happens is when young people come to me and are asking advice on how they should write their Common App essay for college, when my 7th grader comes to me and says she doesn't understand a writing assignment, when my 60-year-old student comes to me and tells me, I'm being told I'm doing this wrong, oftentimes the instruction is the problem. We have to provide space for writers, whether you are a young writer starting out, whether you're an older writer, to experience liberation in the form of expressing ourselves. We have to give people the space and the time and the support and the nurturing they need to put what they put on the pages, because it might not look what it should have looked like in school. And essentially, this is a journey to unlearn everything that you've been told about what you should do as a writer. I mean, a journal entry is a perfect piece of writing in and of itself. It doesn't have to do something else to be more valid. Now, obviously, when you want to publish your writing, that's completely different. Then, unfortunately, we are forced into these avenues of what the writing looks like and what the writing does. But for young people or for new writers, whatever the age, I try to encourage them to just express yourself initially and treat that expression of your writing as something that is very holy and very important in and of itself, and refine that and revise that and pour your soul into that first, and try to not think about all the ways that you are supposed to conform to somebody else's vision about what that form is.
Great.
Well,
What's your opinion?
Well, I think I have to modify the question a little bit, because when I was growing up, there was not even the habit of journaling or anything, so I'm not familiar with the concept, and I've not lived in the US for the last 10 years. I mean, regardless, I'm also an adult now, and then I'm also not, I don't have children or anything of that sort, so I have nothing to connect me with that stage of life, so it's very hard for me to relate to the question that way. But I can modify it to make it something that I think is valuable for the viewer, which is, how do you teach younger people to be inspired about life, or how to look at the world in a bigger way? I think that as we're younger, as we're still learning our place in the world, we're still seeing ourselves kind of as products of our parents and their cultures and their heritages. I think that there's a way, however, that if I were at that age, at that age, I literally just was a product of my parents and nothing else and nothing more. But as I traveled, as I lived in so many places, I learned languages which aren't mine. As I went, not just to countries like Australia, which resembled the US, but places like China or Russia or, Kenya or Egypt, which are very, very different, and still spent multiple, months to years there. I realized that in order to adapt and deal with the world, we have a part of ourselves that wants to limit ourselves. We have a part of ourselves that wants to limit the access of information. What we have to do is the opposite. We have to learn to let go of that part of ourselves and let go of all that comes with that and let everything in, and particularly as we're younger, we have the possibility to learn and to adapt. So I would just say, just let yourself be that way as a child, let yourself be open to everything. Let yourself learn from anyone, anything. You don't know in 20 years, 30 years, what will actually stay as part of you. But if you learn to, one, absorb it all, but not to get hurt by it or to be offended by it or to take something negative from it, to only take the positive, you will get something out of it, and life on it will give something greater to you.
So do you guys see writing as a healing art? I feel like during the pandemic, it has become one of those. How do you really feel, and then is there ways for people to get past, especially because we're seeing a lot of young adults, teenage suicides because they do not know how to express? So how would you go about that? How would you talk about that?
Well, for me, when I was younger, again, so this is another question I think that is valuable for me to answer as a younger version of myself. Nowadays, you only writing as a literary form, but for me, it was very valuable. It was very valuable to take the time and to say that I'm allowed to think these things. I'm allowed to feel these things. And I think that if that truth is there, that yearning to really connect with yourself is there, I think that writing would be a tremendous source of nurturing for someone. So just be honest to the moment. When you're writing for yourself, don't care about literary tropes or structure, these things. Just write and get it out and let yourself be healed by it. And don't take it seriously. Just enjoy it for that purpose, I think.
I think I have probably always written in some ways to heal, whether that's a break up with a boyfriend in high school or whether it's something more serious. I've had a few miscarriages. I spent a lot of time for several years writing about that experience, which to me was extremely isolating and lonely and not talked about. It's still not really talked about, as you probably know, Ritu. And, people are very, there's a cloak of silence about it. And of course, other hard things that I've written about. What's interesting to me is what writing has always done for me is it has helped me process trauma that might have happened years earlier that I didn't even know I was carrying around. I can think of incidents in the past where, for example, racial incidents, that I didn't realize had actually harmed me to the degree that it actually harmed me until 10 years later when I suddenly started writing about it. So, writing has been very therapeutic for me in that sense. It has been a mirror for me to look at myself and to really see what experiences have changed me, have affected me, have made me who I am. And I think it's a very important process for people to use writing to heal. And I think it's important for us to see all of us as writers. You don't have to call yourself a writer, embrace the title of a writer, to actually understand that you are just a writer when you express yourself on the page. And writing can be a great way to do that, especially in a time when we're all so isolated in this pandemic. It can be something that can really help sort of pull you out of loneliness and isolation. And it's so empowering when you are able to write an experience that you might have not even been able to talk to somebody about, but you can write it. And you can essentially share that experience with yourself when you write it, and hopefully heal from that.
So a lot of younger people, you see them, they're blogging, they're photojournaling. That's also a form of expressing. But when you're doing it in a public domain, do you think writers would allow it to become personal, or is just for the screen for people to review publicly?
That's a good question. I think any writer needs to understand that whenever you put writing out there, whether it is an Instagram post, whether it is a Facebook post, whether it is a blog, you are putting yourself at risk, right? You are risking not just being criticized, but being attacked, right? By having trolls come after you, which has happened to me numerous times. So I think what I recommend to people who are writing something very personal is to write it first for yourself and to put it away, and to really think about and meditate about whether or not this is something that you feel safe enough to put out there publicly, right? Maybe share it with a few friends over email first, because there is a lot of toxicity when we publish our very personal experiences online. It's not as if, I began writing pre-internet, right? When I wrote pre-social media. Pieces that I wrote that were very personal would be published in print. And if someone didn't pick up that print issue of that particular magazine, they never knew it existed, right? Nowadays, if it's not online, it doesn't exist.
Right.
So I used to write about these very personal experiences that would be published in a regional magazine that would only have a circulation of 20,000, and then they would disappear. And most of my members of my community would never actually even read it. And so it was gone. There was something very liberating about that, actually, about knowing that it only appeared in print and then it never appeared again, because right now almost everything is online, right? You might have it in a print journal, but then it's also published online and accessible. So I think that is a risk, and an unfortunate risk that writers have to take nowadays, is knowing that something that they write could go viral, and it could go viral for the wrong reasons.
Right.
So I think being engaged online and seeing what other writers are doing, what they are publishing publicly, and how they are treated, whether they are being positively treated or negatively treated, is very important for newer writers to do, is to really think how and in what way they want to put themselves out there, and how, if it gets in the wrong hands, it could actually be very harmful to them.
Right. Okay. So when so this is another thing, it's called copyright issues, right? So you have a great story and you say, okay, I think this is a story I've got to share with my friends or somebody, and somebody still steals your property. What do you do with that? but that could happen,
That's not
right?
something
So-
I've had to deal with, to be honest.
No,
Maybe
and I'm
doing a lot
asking
better.
you, because it happens in fashion and design, like your
Yes.
copyright is.
So I've
they-
had
they,
something plagiarized
Oh,
before.
have you?
So-
Yes, I have. So I had an article that I wrote for a magazine called Paste, which is actually based here in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And another sort of very big magazine, a writer took basically my article, changed it a little bit, and then published it and didn't link to or credit mine, right? I would have actually been fine if they had just put a little bit, a link up there. And so my editor at Paste, approached the editor at the other publication, and then they linked to my piece. But it is a serious problem in this industry, especially people, like I also am a journalist, right? It's a serious problem for every realm of writing, I think. Unfortunately, there's very little you can do about it. Yes, you can try to hire a lawyer and go through that process. It's very expensive. Writers don't make a lot of money.
Yeah.
You would end up spending your yearly salary to hire a lawyer for 3 hours
Right.
to pursue any kind of legal action, right? But it is a serious problem in people taking other work and manipulating it, in people not crediting where they got the idea from. When I publish things online, it's full of links, to other people's work. My book Southbound, I don't know how many hundreds of sources I used, but I have a footnote for all of them. So I think it's very important as writers that we have to understand when you are publishing online, there is a risk that what you write could be used in some way by someone else, and whether it's plagiarism or whether it's simply, getting the idea of somebody else's article, writing your own, and then just failing to link to show that this is the writer who did it first.
All right. What's your writing habit? Like, how do you start? You start in the morning, write at the middle of the night? How do you do that?
I think for me, it's really all over the place. I think that it just depends on what I have to get done. I'm the type of person, if I have to get something done, I just get it done whenever I can and whenever I need to. I try to do it usually in the morning because I think after the afternoon, you get kind of, it's harder to deal with like bigger or more abstract things in your head. But then there are times where at 5 o'clock I'll take a jog and then suddenly I'll have a good idea and I'll have to work on it, or I have the idea of how to rewrite something. So it's just if I have the time, I'll do it. I think especially these days in our like very cluttered era, it's important to make time to write, but I also think it's important to learn the habit of, even if you don't have like that kind of luxury of creating 3 or 4 hours in the morning, you have to do it when you can, because otherwise you'll never get it done.
So I don't have that much of a schedule. My creative writing, so I am not creative every day. I do not wake up and think, okay, here I go writing 4 or 5 more pages of my novel. It doesn't come to me like that. So, I am a freelance journalist, so I do that work I can do, right? Somebody gives me an article assignment, I can research it, I can write it up, I can send it in. I am an adjunct professor, so I can read my students' work and give them their critique. Writing a novel, say, is not something that I can just be like, okay, I'm going to sit down and write my novel. I have to spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to write before I actually sit down to write. And that is also the work of writing, actually, the thinking part, right? Sometimes that's the most challenging part. When I am writing a new novel or a new short story or a new essay, when I'm writing something literary, something creative, especially if it's long, I try to put myself on a first draft schedule of writing 2 pages a day. Even if it is the worst 2 pages I've ever written in my life, even if I know it's so bad it actually won't be included in the book, I try to put myself on a 2-page-a-day schedule. And usually nothing in that first draft, even second draft, makes it into the final book. But that's what I try to do, to force myself into some kind of a habit. Because what it does is it makes me feel productive, which helps in my confidence to keep going with the story. So I'm kind of playing a psychological game on myself, right? Because I do find the act of creating to be extremely difficult. I can't say it's even gotten easier for me. I mean, I've been writing now for over 20 years. It's not something that's easy for me. It's no easier for me today to write an essay than it was 20 years ago. That process isn't easier. It's not easier for me today to write a novel. I'm so excited actually right now about the novel I started working on, but I haven't been able to write more than a few sentences a week. I just, it's not coming to me. So I find it very difficult. So when I get into, to more specifically answer your question, when the moment strikes me to write that novel, I try to work on something. I try to drop everything I'm doing to write it, right? If I'm not on a deadline, a hard and fast deadline, whatever I'm doing, whether it's in the middle of dinner with my family even, if I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what this character should do, I abandon my family at the table and I run and I write it down real quick.
Smart, yeah.
If it's at 2 a.m, if I wake up, use the bathroom, come back, I run to my laptop and I write it down. Because those moments of inspiration are not a routine for me. Mm-hmm. So I have to change up something in order to go write it. And having some kind of schedule is just not something that's ever been a part of my process because it's just creatively, unfortunately, it doesn't work for me. I wish I could say that in the mornings I'm more fresh, right? I mean, I think I wish I could do that, but I can't. So I just take what I can when it comes to me, and that's how I've always worked.
So when you're writing, let's say an essay, when you start an essay to the finish, how many times do you revise it, and does it change altogether from when you started to when you finished?
I have done so many changes. I've had some essays that I've revised for 10 years before I started submitting it. I've written so many things over and over and over again. I mean, there are some essays that I've probably revised 50 times. It is a very imperfect process for me for a very long time before I have a finished essay.
I'm a little bit of a different type of writer. I think I'm also primarily a fiction writer. Mm-hmm. I have written essays and I like to write a lot of book criticism as well. I think for me it just happens to be that if I get going and I can just follow it to the end, I can, and it's pretty much done as it is. And even I've had a lot of pieces accepted without much editing. Conversely, if it's just not going to happen for the whole day, I usually sit there, try to write 5 or 6 pages, fail at it, and I just get angry at myself for the whole day. That being said, a structured essay is more difficult, but I think that at the end of the day, it's also a process. I think it's a mix of like getting the inspiration to write about it, but also to follow it with a routine, as Anjali would do. I think that if I were to write a long, like 30-page essay, it would have to be a mix. I think that each chapter would also be its own space, its own space to kind of pause on and meditate.
So writing a book, I was watching Judy Blume's masterclass, and she said that she never deals with a book. Is that, like, you both have written books, how do you start a book? Now, essays are a little bit different, books with a whole story can.
Yeah,
how do you start with that?
I think it depends. I think each of my novels, attempts to write a novel, are a macrocosm, their world, and I think that I very much look at them as if they were, like with We Are the Forsaken World, there were 4 different regions, and a huge conglomerate of different characters that were ultimately blurring its subliminal spaces to create greater interconnectivities in that language. And here is going to be 365 different places with a mother and father character that always re-transition into a new national context, and they kind of stitch together to create a greater narrative over the course of a decade. So for me, I have this full idea of a microcosm, this full idea of what I want to create, and each story is just a section in that greater universe, that greater world I'm creating. I just write down to give a little piece of the greater story happening in my head. So I see my books not as books but as worlds, and those pieces of writing are just like the piece of evidence of that greater world.
Now, does it change with what's currently happening?
Oh yeah, are you referring to the world?
When you're writing a book, do you say, oh wait, I was writing about this, but hey, this big event happened. How do I switch from that event, and I'm still in the space of writing?
That's happened to me all the time with Kiran, not Me of the Forsaken World, because that was all fiction. I created my own imagined worlds. But with Kiran, I was planning some stories set around New Year's last year, and then one of the New Year's got cancelled. I was planning one in Hong Kong, and then it got cancelled because of the Hong Kong protests, and then COVID happened, it cancelled the Thai New Year and all these things. So yeah, absolutely it changes. I mean, the world changes. That's why I realized that with a book like Kiran, which is going to be set over the course of a decade, it's going to be told in real time, I can't actually plan and write and then, wait a year and rewrite and rewrite. I really have to write in the moment. Otherwise, what happens is that every month something changes. So yeah, it is an unfortunate part of the thing, having to live more in the moment.
I actually think, for me, it's much easier to envision the story that goes in a novel than in short fiction. Kiran probably can write me under the table when it comes to short stories. I can produce a decent short story every 5 years. I happen to think short story writing is closer to poetry because it really is all about the economy of language. And it's about how to tell a big story in a small space, which I actually think is more challenging than writing a novel. When I start a novel, I actually know the end of the novel before I start writing. Sometimes my book that's coming out in May, The Parted Earth, I knew the ending months before I started actually putting a single word on the page, because I have to see the end. I have to see the light at the tunnel before I invest myself so completely in a very difficult and process. So, but I have a terrible time writing short stories. I have a terrible time even having an idea of a short story. So, I mean, I think in this sense, Kiran, you have a very diverse ability to be able to plunge into different worlds and to know, that this is going to be a short story, that this is going to be a novel, that this is a collection of essays. That's something that I find very difficult to do.
Well, I also think that different talents have different structures as well. I think when someone is more like what we call a traditional novelist, that you're writing a 400-page book just about one person going through a journey, you have to be able to create that, 50 pages of it have to move in a certain direction, have to take you in a certain way. Where for me, that's extremely difficult. I'm like, why do I have to spend 50 pages on this? I can do it in 10. And, I've tried to write long novels involving like a character, something. I'm like, but I don't need to say this in 200 pages. It's like, I can say it in 10 or 20 and it has the exact same amount of time. So but people also like longer novels, by the way, more than stories at certain times. So there's also a way of how does one tell this longer story, but give it that variety in which there's like multiple stories, or giving you that sense of the full spectrum of that person's life, which is another thing entirely, which is what I'm also trying to do with a little bit with Kiran, because even though it's going to be a lot of different stories compiling together, the mother-father archetype or the universal cosmic feelings is very much the same. So I think I'm excited to see how, if I can create this like greater archetypal cosmic feeling that creates that consistency of a novel, but each story, say set in Vanuatu or set in, I don't know, Bahamas or whatever, still has that feeling of a locally built story. So that's something I'm going to play with.
So how do you research for all this stuff? Where do you all start?
Researching is damn difficult, I think, for both of us, I'm sure.
It's really tough. And I think, one of the struggles that I have as a writer is sometimes I fall so deeply into the research that I am no longer actually producing story. I had, so for the Parted Earth, I actually was reading obsessively about partition before I was even considered myself a writer. I was reading, first I read fiction, then I started reading nonfiction, and writing a novel about it was the furthest from my mind. I would never have even imagined it back then. But then when I started actually coming up with the idea for the novel, then I started actually reading firsthand testimonies that were being collected by archival organizations. So you can fall into that, for years, you can spend, researching. Same with my nonfiction book. I mean, I could have researched for years for what ended up coming out of that book. I think as a writer, at some point, you have to wrestle with the fact that you are going to be writing something, and this is going to be a story that is going to incorporate what you have learned, but ultimately, especially if it's fiction, it's going to be different, right? It's not going to be the same thing. It's going to come out of the research and be its own universe, and hold its own. So I think what I try to do as a writer is I try to research, but then also make it a part of the writing process, right? Keep going in the writing while I'm researching. You don't have to know all the answers in the research to produce a story, right? Whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You can then go back and see what part of the story needs to be resolved, what needs to be revised, what needs to be perhaps fact-checked, which is something I did with the nonfiction book. So you can do that later. But I think the hard part is often just not getting so caught up in the research that you, in fact, are not doing any writing of your own writing. because you can just spend inordinate amounts of time doing research and not producing.
Yes, I think for me, research is, I'm a little bit of the opposite, Anjali, sometimes in bad ways. I tend to be a little like bored by research and I want to like have more like real life experience or things that kind of complement my writing. So with We Live in the Forsaken World, it was a fictional book. It was entirely 4 places that I invented. But what I did was, I had lived some time in Peru, I lived in Kenya, I lived in Indonesia, and I took these places and as well India and all these things. And I took narratives from those places and I combine them and merge them in ways to create these kind of quote unquote realistic fake places that could have been out of these places. And then from those experiences, I also created other people. With Kiran, it's going to be, it's not as much fiction. It is fiction. It's very much as much as fiction, but I cannot just make up how Vanuatu looks like. I cannot make up how like Peru looks like. I actually have to know to a certain extent what the local customs is, what the accents are, how they use language, etc. In certain places I do it better, but then there's certain places where I don't have the expertise. I either was just there for too short of a period, or I've not been there at all. And this COVID period has made that very specific. Like I feel like I really, especially living in places like Australia, the US, where there's not a lot of culture, you really feel like, oh my God, if I want to recreate like Peruvian dialect right now, I don't know what I'm going to do, So then it's like, I have to do research. I go on YouTube a lot. I look at like random people speaking and I look at places there, but yeah, I mean, I could probably learn from Anjali how to do like really hardcore research because I'm not as good at it as I would like to be.
Well, I am not either. I am not very efficient with it. And I think it's a double-edged sword having so much research online, right?
Yeah.
Because you can technically never stop researching.
And the other thing is a lot of online research is fake, not fake, but it's not authentic, Like I look up things and I say I'll have a story set in Suriname or some country or South Africa. I will look it up like on Wikipedia, South African English or something. I look it up, and then exactly I show it to a friend. They're like, "What are you?" That no one has ever said. I've never heard this before, so you have to be careful.
So they say that writing is emotionally draining and very stressful as a process. How would you inspire younger authors to? What tips would you have for them? Not to be like so taken in by the book they're writing, the stuff they're writing.
I think, writing should be part of your living. So when it becomes something that really bogs you down, do something you enjoy instead of it, because you need to be able to nurture all of yourselves when you are a writer. So for example, I love taking walks. So if I'm starting to feel really bad about my writing, about the process, about the progress, if I start to realize that I've spent, weeks writing 50 pages that are going to be tossed, which is something that happens, I try to then go out of my way to nourish other things about myself, right? Before COVID, that often meant going out to dinner with girlfriends. With my family, that means going on a hike in North Georgia. That means watching a movie instead that I'm enjoying. So I think it's really important for us to understand that, you can be a serious writer. You can make this a big aspect of your life, but don't lose the other parts of yourself for it, because then you won't be able to emotionally sustain your writing, to emotionally sustain yourself as a writer. So I encourage people to do other things, and those other things will feed yourself as a writer. They will feed your writing in some way. You just have to make sure that you are taking care of yourself very broadly, and that will help you be able to move through those very difficult moments when you're a writer and you're feeling that, maybe I shouldn't be doing this at all. Maybe I shouldn't be writing this at all.
Yeah, I completely agree with Anjali. I think that you said it very aptly, and I think that it's something that we as authors or writers, we're already denigrated so much by society. We feel like we have to be extremely serious and have to always be penning things and always looking at things. But in reality, to be an artist is just one way that we are fulcruming ourselves to the greater world, and we're just trying to be a medium for something bigger, like any art, And we then also have to be tied to the world. We cannot just be tied to our ego or imagination. We also have to be listening to others. We have to be listening to other countries, other people, other communities, other things, and allow ourselves to be connected. So I think it may sound counterproductive, but the more that you're able to connect yourself as well to other things and other beings and other people, you're also more likely in ways that you don't realize. Because a lot of also becoming a better writer is just letting yourself mature into your talent. There's so much emphasis on this workshop model, which is really overly writing, something. But I've noticed that if you're meant to be a writer, it'll just come to you naturally, and over time you get better and you just learn your own mistakes and you correct it for yourself. So I think learning instead to just let yourself naturally age into your writing and become a better writer and make mistakes, write a bad story, write a bad essay, learn what's wrong with it, and then rewrite it maybe in some years, or even write something new, but then subconsciously kind of internalize those things and, get something out of it. Then you're more likely to progress as a writer that way than just really for 1 year, just working really hard on one thing, I think.
All right, before we go on our break, one word answers. How would you describe when somebody critiques your writing? How do you feel?
Grateful. Can I explain why?
Yes, go ahead.
I have never had a critique where there hasn't been a single kernel of truth to it in my writing. Even the cruelest thing said about my writing, if I'm able to walk away from it, maybe 5 years down the road, I see a little bit of truth to the critique. And it makes me a better writer. And it's very difficult to receive it. I often feel embarrassed or ashamed. I often feel embarrassed or ashamed, actually, as a writer in general. But the critiques, as hard as they are, I am grateful for them because I actually grow and change as a writer because of them. When somebody is gracious enough to invest their own time that they're not getting paid for, to say, listen, you messed this up. You should have seen this differently. You should have done this differently. It is an investment in me as a writer.
Good. So we're going on a break for 5 minutes and we will be back at 3:05. Thank you.
So much more. Yeah, that's okay. We'll be on break. Just go to the other side. Let's stop video mute. Stay right. Just stop video mute. Oh, it is. Stop video mute.
You done?
Are we showing still?
Have a good guys.
That actually went much faster than I thought it would.
Yeah, and I haven't even finished my questions.
Okay, so that was great. That was really awesome. The one-liner.
Yeah.
That one.
No, they're muted. Okay, let me make an announcement. Yeah. While the participants are taking a break, I would like to make an announcement. IACA is holding an event, Youth Talent Show. Is a contest. If any of your kids up to college, if they are interested in participating, they can go to iacaatl.org, Youth Talent Show, and they can register and send that. They need not be this talent, could be in any area. It could be music, dance, drawing, public speaking, any other areas. They can participate and kind of give entries, and there will be prizes. So we look forward to, and this is on March 26 to 28. So please join. And I would also like to thank the people who have helped make this event possible. One, Amit Arora, the host. Then we have Josna Hegde, provided all the necessary graphic designs and other things. Then Beena Desai. Then Vijay Chandrasekhar. And our EC members, Rani Singh, Chaitanya Bhat, Geetanjali Talukdar, and Dhananjay Gupta. And we hope you're going to enjoy, visiting more events in the April and March and April. And March 7th, we have the yoga therapy session with Satya Soman. And March 13th is the Women's Conference. So please join us. Thank you. And also, we're starting an event called Rhythms of India on April 24th. Dance groups will be showcasing their talents in different rhythms. And we're also planning a health fair. And August we'll have Festival of India. Then September, Atlanta Indian Idol. And there are more other items that will be announced in the coming days. Please be part of these events and become a member of IACA. You can become a member of IACA at iacaatl.org, or you can go to IACA Facebook group, IACA, India American Cultural Association. There's a Facebook group. You can join there. And thank you for attending today's event. The program will resume after the break is over. So
So they have to go and
I see.
Yeah.
Hi, we are back. So my first question after the break is stereotypes. So we as Indian community have a certain stereotype of how we would prefer our children to be. Do we want them to be a physician, a lawyer, or an engineer? When you chose to be a writer, they're not traditional roles, they're not traditional careers. How do you tell your parents without disrespecting their wishes?
Oh, I definitely can answer that question. Literally everything that is a person of South Indian heritage should be, I was not. And it was very difficult for me. I still suffer from a lot of internalized guilt and all these things, which is why I am both a person who suffered in some ways, but also stronger, So I think that, we're born in certain positionalities, we're made in certain ways, and we just have to, it's part of life, and at the same time, though, I'm not very grateful to be in the position I'm in, because now for people who are younger to me or who have a different generation, I can stand and I can also talk. And, now that I get invited, by Tata and all like the TISS and all these spaces, to come and talk about what it means to be different. And, sometimes I'm in a room with 400 people who are from India and Chandigarh asking me like, how do you come out? How do you do these types of things? And it's like, it's very good. It's good that I can be in a space to educate the younger generation. And, South Asia is in a very interesting space as well now. I mean, you wouldn't imagine it, not just South Asia. Even growing up in Georgia, it was very difficult actually in the 90s and 2000s. You can't imagine how it was. Maybe you can, but I mean, yes, it was very conservative and very backwards. You could have never imagined what Atlanta would have been, It's like, it's crazy. But India is also in that space now, and now it's getting so much more open, and people are willing to not only learn, but to accept people who are different. So I think if I had to give advice, I mean, just be yourself, learn to be yourself, learn to have confidence in yourself, learn that you are a guiding arrow and that you will ultimately hit your space. But you have to also let go of the fact that not everyone will understand you, not just if you're different, even if you're very traditional, people don't always understand you, know what you're meant to be, right? So you have to learn to let it go and to do what you have to do regardless, because that is the only one true way.
Well, I was a mess. So I started out, exactly as you said, Ritu, it was in my head, right? Have to do something responsible, be a doctor, be a lawyer, whatever. So I started out pre-med. Because I never saw myself as a writer, I started out pre-med. I took most of my pre-med classes in college. I then decided I just did not want to be a doctor. I just could not see myself doing that. So then the thing to do was to be a lawyer, because everyone said, well, you write well, why don't you be a lawyer? Not a single person told me, you write well, maybe you should be a writer. Not a single South Asian said that, right? So what did I do? I then went to law school, right? So, I mean, I'm glad I did, because I am an activist, and so that background has certainly helped me. But I was a lawyer for 5 years, and of course, the writing that you do as a lawyer is not the same kind of writing that you do as a journalist or as an author. So it took me a very long time to find my way down this path. And while I am certainly grateful for all of my past detours, I think it's I hope the younger generation feels more confident in knowing and understanding their talents and their gifts and understanding the opportunities out there. Now, I will say this, you really cannot sustain yourself financially as being a writer, unless you are Stephen King, unless you are Jhumpa Lahiri. You cannot actually make a living doing this. You have to do other things. Kiran teaches, I teach. My day job is freelance journalism. So, but you can, if you do also like, let's say, engineering, you can actually be an engineer by day and a freelance writer and an author at night. Many writers do that because they have to pay the rent. They have to feed their children. So understand that no matter what career path you go down, writing can still be your career path. You just might have to mold it and shape it around these other better paying jobs so that you can have health insurance. But you can always be a writer, and you can always be a writer at any phase in your life and while doing any other career.
And I'll just add one more thing to that. The other thing that you can consider also is maybe finding ways to complement your writing career with other arts-related types of careers, like being a curator, working in the arts community, working in arts organizations. You can also still be committed to the arts in other ways, if you don't want to go the traditional path.
So here's the time for you both to talk about your books. Who wants to go first?
Okay, you go. Alphabetical order, at least by last name. Well, I'm working on a very, very ambitious book, which I've alluded to several times in the course of our talk. It's called Girar, which means to turn in Spanish. And what I want to do is create a turn around two very important things in my life, the family structure and the world. So I wanted to create a book that will allow me to turn over all the different facets of growing older, getting closer to people, changing your relationships with others, but also to literally go to every corner of the world at once. And so there's this archetypal mother and father, who are living a life to themselves as their son lives far away. And there's a certain core disagreement in, their understandings of the world. And there's this way that over time, they slowly learn to let go of each other and their egos to finally become part of something bigger, each other. And I want to take a little bit of that kernel of that story and tell a little bit about it in each of the different parts of the world that I'm interested in, or actually every nation in the world. So each section of that greater story, which is a very slow burn, will take place over the course of a decade, is going to take place in another part of the world, whether it be Fiji, whether it be Hawaii, whether it be Turkmenistan, whether it be, Mumbai, whether it be Lagos, whether it be, I could list on and on. And each part has a greater kernel of a greater piece of that story, whether it be from the mother's perspective, the father's perspective, maybe a relative's perspective, maybe even from outside perspectives as well. But the first book will launch from April 13th to May 12th, and it'll be told in installment form. So I'm not publishing this as a traditional book for now. I would later like to get some type of deal and get it published traditionally. But my first goal is to just publish it through a streaming website where I have a platform and you subscribe, you pay a certain amount of money like how you do to Netflix to be able to read the stories. Yeah, subscription model. And you pay a certain amount of money to get the story sent to you. And the stories are not only sent to you, but they're published on a very specific time and day. So, if a story is happening in Mysore, Karnataka at 6 a.m., on April 13, 2021, it is published directly at that exact time when the story is supposed to take place, as if the reader, whether they're in Atlanta or Fiji, can read it, and the next day it might be in Buryatia in Russia, the next day it might be in Pyongyang, North Korea, at different times. But each person can follow it and get it delivered to them at that very particular time it's supposed to happen. So you're following a story as if a fictional story, one that I've created and all over the world, but as if it's happening in real time all across the globe. So I want to create this kind of live journal of the world, to create a journal of the world over the 10 years and tell this very kind of heartbreaking universal story of a family learning to accept each other despite their differences.
Okay, so how about you?
I can't wait for that.
Thank you.
And we will find how to read those installments. How will
So there's several, there's going to be a website which I gave to Jordan, which is still under development. The website is still under development, however. We're still working through the kinks with my developer, but you get that website and you subscribe annually, you give money, and then you get access to that platform. And then just like, Netflix, you get all these videos and all these things. You then get access to all these stories and just updates. My goal is to publish, in the first book will be 30 stories. It will come from April 13th to May 11th, but afterwards you'll get 2-3 stories a month. So it's a good amount of content. The price is very low. It's only 100 rupees,
Oh, that's not bad.
Oh,
Is it
wow.
same in the US?
Yeah, it'll be about $1.50.
Okay.
And that
That's
means
easy for young people to do that.
Exactly, because the reason why I'd want to do that is I wanted to create it as accessible as possible. It's a novel for the world, so I can't just be, giving it to the people who are the elites of the world. The people who are humble and who might want to read it but cannot afford it in other parts of the world should also be able to access it. And 100 rupees, that's just like one biryani, in a city in Delhi or Mumbai, or even a little bit.
Cheaper, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So like if you go to like a local place, not like a nice restaurant, but you just, my point is that it's not a lot to ask for someone, I think, and you're getting a lot of stories in just a month, even 2-3 stories, as like you can get a collection of 7 stories and pay $10 or $20, So I think I'm giving a lot of content at a very low price, so.
And the platform is, you're making the platform?
Yes, it's a platform I've created,
Yeah.
well, with a web development team. That's why we still have some kinks. It should be ready, however, by April 13th, which is when it'll actually go like fully up, and that's when the stories will start to come.
April 13th,
Yes.
2021.
And
this
yes,
year.
yes, in a month and a half. And then you just register and you pay, and then it'll come to your email and say a story is coming, and then you'll get an access to it each day as it's
And you
done.
have it till 2029,
Yes.
so that's a long period.
It's a very long story, yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah.
going to have its own hurdles and problems, but anyways. But I want to tell the story of a decade, and I want to,
Yeah.
because that lets you slowly create a life and people, and you don't have to you can show them how they slowly change, how people are just, that's one thing I really love, the way that people, they are 99% the same, but we change a little bit, like 1% every few years, and that's what makes us exciting, that small change.
So the stories that the characters are all the same? Or
They will follow the same archetypal prisms. In other words, there'll always be a mother who's a housewife who's reflecting on certain things, or there'll always be her sister, whatever. But they will not, they then will change to fit the localities. So the religion that the mother and sister might pray to might be Buddhism, like Tibetan Buddhism in one story, and then the next will be Orthodox Catholic if they're in Greek or something, like that. So, and then the dress will change, the racial features will change, but the archetypal core of who they are will not change.
So is it like an aging process too as they go?
Yes, the stories stay chronological, yes.
I can't wait for it.
That's
I'm so
so
excited.
exciting. I thought the whole thing was really cool.
And I'm not familiar with that form of
Yeah.
as a reader, so I'm actually just as excited as a reader
Yes,
as I am
that's
as
what
a
I want to
writer.
say actually about the digital thing, because you had talked about how, web had changed
Yeah.
a lot of things. And I want to say also, the digital world also changed the way that we can imagine the forms of writing. We need not just be writing blogs or web journals. There are also so many other ways that now writing can change, just like video is changing, music is changing, everything is changing to fit our digital world. So there's a lot of ways
That's
to
very interesting.
adapt it.
Yeah, I love that he said, I said, no, you need to explain this to the audience because I don't think I can, do it justice. So let's talk about your book.
So I've got 2 books coming out this spring. On April 15th, my first book is coming out from the University of Georgia Press. It's called Southbound, Essays on Identity, Inheritance, and Social Change. This is a collection of critical essays. So I'm not, most of these essays have a personal lens at the beginning, but then they become a critical essay about usually an issue. So I write about, for example, growing up as an Indian American in the South, in the Deep South, not even near Atlanta, but I also write about voting rights here. I write about gun violence. I write about my relationship with feminism. I write about racism, nationalism. But this essay collection really changed over the years because initially I was writing about how I was affected by all of these forces, and I started realizing that, in fact, when I am writing about white supremacy, even though I have been on the receiving end of it, that I am actually also a perpetrator of it, that I am complicit in a lot of the oppressive forces that we have in this country. And I started looking more inwardly at myself in the ways that I have actually substantiated the harm that a lot of groups that have been historically marginalized here. So, so that essay collection will be out mid-April. And my novel is called The Parted Earth. It's coming out on May the 4th. It tells the story of partition over 70 years. So the first part of the book it's divided into 3 parts. The first part, part 1, is told primarily in 1947 in New Delhi. Then the second part of the book is primarily told in 2016 in Atlanta, Georgia. And then the other parts of the book are told in London in the 1950s, in Amsterdam in the present day, in Amritsar, in Atari. So it bounces around to other parts, to 3 continents to tell the story. The novel revolves around a woman named Shawn Johnson, who is actually biracial. She is half Indian and half white. And I am probably most like her of the characters in the story. My father is an Indian immigrant, but my mother is half Puerto Rican and half Austrian, and I grew up in the United States. So ultimately, it's about how trauma from partition is actually shapes and is inherited by the descendants, especially descendants who are not as culturally connected to their heritage, who are estranged perhaps from some of their relatives that lived in during that time. So it's told through multiple characters, multiple points of view. Actually, it sounds a little bit like what you're doing, Kiran, interestingly enough. But so Sean is sort of on this mission to solve sort of a mystery about what happened to her family. She has no connection to her Indian side of the family. And it's not until she's, 40 years old living in Atlanta, it's not until she experiences her own tragedy in her own life that she starts to look for all these other pieces of her lives that have gotten lost.
So I just want to make one more plug for Anjali, because I read an early review copy of Southbound and Recorded Earth. And Southbound particularly, I think you're an extremely strong essayist, Anjali. I really like you in the essay form. And I think you do, and so I'm doing a little bit of an endorsement here. I really think if any of you are interested in the essay form and seeing someone who is really good at the telling detail, in particularly in the essay form, like taking a very small thing, the way you describe certain things and then you amplify it with keeping it understated. I think that's you should read her essay collection, Southbound. And I think it's important that we do read more like quote unquote Indian American narratives that are not stereotypical or do not have that typical Jubilee hearing. I mean, I don't want to rag on Jubilee hearing, but there's certain stereotype of how our narratives are formed, and I think that Southbound does a good job in giving us a narrative of Indian American experience that is not just so cut and paste.
So do you find as a publisher, publishing pushbacks is my second question, when we have stories like, the biggest hit right now is The White Tiger, right? It is the story of a guy who's born in poverty. It's a very Indian story. Do you find when you're publishing something that the publishing houses wants those sad stories about India, or they are really open to your stories, like the existence of what you feel as an Indian American? Because every story, the Fine Line, the Shantaram, you name a few, they all are very similar.
They're very similar, yeah.
And it sort of, with the part, you just feel like, how much can you as an Indian reading an Indian written by an Indian author go on with this? They are better stories and they are more creative stories. So do you all feel there is a publishing pushback?
No, absolutely. I mean,
So I think it should be said that Kiran and I are not with mainstream big presses.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, Kiran, your journey, whether you attempted to go the literary.
I did, yes. Oh, yeah, I did.
So I attempted for many years. So it took me 11 years from the time I first started trying to get a literary agent and to publish through a bigger house before I finally got my first book contract. 11 years is a long time to get rejected. So I have had a few agents, 2 agents I officially signed with, one that I sort of worked with, but then we never actually got to the point where she became my official agent. I had a very unsuccessful, unfulfilling, very depressing route to publication in trying to get an agent and then in hoping to get a contract with one of the big 5 presses, right? The HarperCollins, the Penguin Random House, most presses that most people know here in the United States. So it wasn't until I gave up actually going that route and started submitting to small presses. And interestingly enough, a lot of small presses now require that you have an agent, unfortunately. There is a lot of gatekeeping in this industry that prevents writers who are not telling what is known as the tropish Indian American story, that prevents us from getting published. So University of Georgia Press is a university press. It is a small nonprofit press. Hub City Press is based in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It is a small nonprofit press. Had these presses not offered me book deals, my work would still not be out there. It was not the type of work that fit in sort of the very commercial, very narrow mainstream idea of what a good Indian American story is. And if it wasn't for these presses, I would still be, I probably would have given up, to be quite honest. It had been such a long road. And, Kiran, I know you can speak to this as well.
Oh, yeah, it was very difficult. I mean, I also am indie published, and I think that the indie press world, I mean, we have to be grateful in some way that there are people who are willing to take risks at all, with who we, I think that it's but then on one side, yes, we do not fit or we do not necessarily want to tell that which will then go on to become like really corporately successful
Right.
stories. I think that then, however, the beauty of the internet and the digital world is that now there's so many ways to access publication, and in 10 years, people are saying, well, maybe these top five things won't even exist anymore.
Right.
But we're now in a transition period in the world, and it's a good time to now approach other forms of publishing, other ways to publish, not just in the idea of self-publishing versus traditional publishing, but just changing the format we can publish and tell stories, because now is a good time to start to test other ways to get readers and to get people who interested in the work. And maybe that type of success, which is that New York Times bestseller list, is not actually the one that will be your version of success. There might be other forms for us, which fit our ways of connecting to the world more.
All right, it's time for my Q&A. So my first question is from Dr. Majumdar. She, and I, assuming you might end up answering this a little bit better, she said, should writers address problems existing in our community, especially a subtle or crude related to suppression of women in our community? Some of these are professional women suppressed by societal pressures. Literature addresses the suppressed voices.
Absolutely. I mean, I think literature at its most powerful is when it gives a platform, when it gives a space for people who have been suppressed, for people who have been oppressed, to tell their stories, including and especially women who are Indian American. Some people do not feel like they can be heard, and I think we do a great service as readers, as writers, as coming together to encourage the writing of those stories, to support those stories when they are in fact published, right? The best way to get stories out into the world for people who feel that their voices are not being heard is to then pay money for those books, click on the essay, share the essay with people online. Because when those stories are read, publishing houses, publishers of magazines and newspapers, then decide, oh, maybe I should go and maybe I should publish other stories by people from this community who are experiencing the same types of things. So we can do that. We can be supportive of these stories. We can encourage these writers who may feel very hesitant to share their stories, and we can amplify them. We can do as a community, we can rally around those writers and push out those narratives into the public sphere and get those voices heard.
All right, the second question is from Ani Agnihotri. If you write your journey as authors again, what would you do differently?
No, I don't know. It's this weird thing where, like, yes, I could change something, but I'm also very happy with how things have gone. So it's a weird thing to say. I mean, of course, there's that part of you that thinks, well, I'm older and wiser now, so I would just rewind it 10 years. But even those 10 years of learning were important, right? So I don't think I'd change a thing. I'm pretty happy with how my journey has gone.
That's good. That's really good.
So I am where I am because of many years of failure. The reason that I am a journalist at all is because I could never sell my fiction, truthfully. I backed into so many different careers because I had failed for so long. And the reason I am writing about things like voting rights and politics is because I could not figure out how to get my fiction out in the world. So I am grateful for that. What I will say is that I wish that the industry, the publishing industry, was less toxic, was less abusive, because my journey of all this failure could have been a little less harmful to me if it wasn't such a damaging industry to engage with to begin with. So that is in part my regret, is that it had to be as hard as it was because dealing with that many years of failure is very difficult in the publishing industry environment.
Yeah. But I think it's also a good point then to think you don't have to use that as your metric for success. You can learn to be successful in other ways, or to be successful for what you are.
And we can be the change, right?
Exactly.
We can be activists in this industry while we are also being writers of this industry.
Exactly. And that's important.
So there's one question about do you have any advice on getting published?
I will say, first of all, there are several things. one, if you can write well and you really put your heart and soul to something, it'll eventually get published by some form, whether it is like a small press or a big press. I mean, and if it doesn't, like you can always self-publish. Like at the end of the day, we're living in a time now where self-publishing, I think, is less stigmatized. And even if it is stigmatized, I realized that even if you self-publish some things when you were younger, like people no longer look down on that either. Like you might have needed to write that story to just learn, and then you can later approach. Now there's this writer, Toy Peters, who's one of the first transgendered writers making mainstream success. And she did not publish traditionally. Her first two books were self-published. Right. Now she's a New York Times bestseller. So, no one looks down on that as much anymore. So not take it seriously. Like if you have to write something, just first of all, just write it, get it done, make sure it's as good as you can make, and then see how it goes. Spend a few years doing what we did, creating agents. If no agent is interested, then go for the small presses. And then if no small press is interested, then maybe look for self-publishing. And, of course, building up your repertoire, publishing in journals, publishing in smaller magazines, working yourself up to big ones. Just, and not limiting yourself just to that one book, learning that maybe that was just the book you had to write when you were 30 and it's just that one book,
Absolutely. And a plug to Tori. Her book is Detransition Baby, and it is a phenomenal book. I highly recommend it. I read it recently and I loved it. So my advice would be to find your community of people, however you define that, because I think that the only route to publishing is one where you have a lot of people who support your writing. The only reason I lasted this long in this very toxic industry is because I had many people rallying around me, and most of those people happen to be other South Asian authors. Have somebody that you can literally pick up the phone and cry on the phone with them about what a hard time you're having trying to get published. I had this in my life, and this is what sustained me. South Asian writers, Black writers, Latinx writers, I couldn't have done this without their support. So find the people in your community who will not be competitive with you, but who will support you, who will rally around you. But also find the people who will hold you accountable. I've had friends who they'll text me out of the blue. I might not have heard from them for months saying, how's that novel going? And I will realize that I've actually not touched the novel for several weeks. They're holding me accountable. They're saying, whatever else you have going, you are a writer. But a lot of these friends of mine do not have children. They couldn't care less that I have obligations to children, that I had somebody who was sick and throwing up all night. They only care that I'm putting words on the page. And it is a wonderful thing to have writers without children holding writers with children accountable. Because the fact that you care for 3 kids is irrelevant to your being a writer. It is. You still have to prioritize your writing. You still have a day job. So what? You have to produce as a writer. You have to keep working on your collection of essays or your memoir or your screenplay. None of that actually matters. How busy you are in your life. We are all busy. We all have excuses every day to not write. It doesn't matter. Find the people who will hold you accountable to the page. They will keep you writing. They will keep you submitting your work. They will be there for you to cry on their shoulder when you need to cry on their shoulder. So get your community together, because that is what will sustain you the most.
I also want to say that, including community, I think as you get closer to publishing, following is another thing to consider. Having those people who will come to your events, who will come to promote your book, who like your writing, even if it's not published by the biggest publishers, you can still meet people who read it and are impacted by it and really like it, and they want to learn more about you, And I think that we put a lot onto, when am I getting capital P published? When am I going to get this giant publisher who will do all the work for me, who get all my cores of readers, who get all these things for me? But in reality, sometimes you have to do a lot of that work, and it's important, rather than taking it as this is just that one book that's going to get that big, shot into the basketball hoop, that I'm slowly building a community. And I'm also building people who like to read my books, who like to read what I have to say, and who will continue to do so for as long as it
And you do this very well, Kiran. I think you really touched on an important point, which is building the community. You cannot be in this game if you are not investing in other writers, if you are not sharing your platform with other writers, if you are not giving back. Kiran will start all of these group messages over WhatsApp, over Facebook Messenger, over email with other South Asian writers saying, hey, what if we did this event together? What if we did that event together? That is a valuable service that you put out into the world for our community. And that's what we have to do. Follow other South Asian writers on Twitter, on Facebook. Tag them to promote their work. When you get a book, Take a photo of it, post it to Instagram, tag them, promote and promote and promote other people in your community's work. You have to give to receive, and it has to be a two-way relationship with you and other writers. So when you are building that community, give back, exchange, make sure that you are doing enough to uplift their work as well.
That's a very good thing to do. All right. What piece of your writing you're most proud of and why?
Take this one, that's a big question.
I'm very proud of my first book of Kiran, which will come. I think it's one of the best things I've written, not to sound egotistical, but I'm really happy with it. And I think a lot of that experimentation that I was trying to do in View of the Forsaken World, which I think unfortunately failed because it was too experimental in a certain way, I've reined in on that and then put enough traditional but also experimental to make it the perfect balance. So I think I'm really excited to see how people read it once it comes out.
So you do change it as you go along.
What do you mean?
Like you just said that you thought it was not doing well, so then you changed it and made it more traditional.
I'm referring to, so We Live in the Forsaken World.
Uh-huh.
At the time, I just want to write a book about 4 different regions and really bring them, not only those 4 region steps, but also to intersperse interconnected narratives in the same way that we live in a digital age where someone can communicate in Germany to someone in Syria, to someone in Afghanistan, whatever. And I want to create that in a space. So this is like floating realm of hundreds of different narratives colliding through these moments of poetry. So some people really liked it. A lot of people couldn't get into it. And I realized reading reviews that, okay, not in the sense I want to change it because that was its own project, but in the sense of I understood why it was not as successful as I would have liked it to be. Of course, it was still successful in a lot of ways. Like it sold a few thousand copies and it had some recent press. So I'm pretty happy with it still, but it didn't go super well. So then when I think of Hirar, I think I'm just happy that casually it's the right amount of, this type and that type, So I'm happy with that.
So you have to analyze your book while you are writing it.
I guess, but I don't know. It's not conscious though. It was more just like the structure that book had to take just happened to fit into these ways. And I think it's just more accessible, is what I'm trying to say. Hirar is more accessible than We Live in the Forsaken World. And I'm happy with that. So you go ahead.
So I'm very proud of both of these books coming out. I think one of the hardest things about being a writer, especially in the online world, is that you have a lot of writing online that you're not proud of anymore. Like I wish I could really take down some of the stuff that I've written from online, and I'm horrified about some of the stuff that I've written that's been published online that is now there forever and ever and ever, and people will have access to it, unfortunately. But I am very proud about these books because I did spend not only a lot of time writing them, but a lot of time really being critical of myself about whether I should write them, how I should write them. And I think part of that is because I had spent years being, and I still am, a book critic, as is Kiran. When you spend a lot of time analyzing books, you do start to look more critically at your work. But part of it is that also I had some very good readers. I found the right people to be very critical of each of my books, who were friends but could talk to me as not a friend but a book critic and say, this is where you're going wrong. This needs to be improved. This is what you need to reconsider that you haven't considered up until this point. So I was able to find a network of support of people, of freelance editors, of people who could read for authenticity, to really critically break down the book to its finest elements and give me their feedback. The reason I am proud of these books has a lot to do with these other writers who could tell me straight, this is where it is succeeding, this is where it's failing, let's figure out how to solve this problem.
Okay, this is about a writer's blog. There's some Santosh Kothari. He said, I just self-published yesterday on a book called Growing Up in Mumbai, India by Santosh Kothari on Amazon. I have no idea what I need to do next. Help.
That sounds like a cry for distress. Well, first of all, Santosh, have you asked your friends to look at it? That's a hard question to answer, I think.
I've never self-published,
Yeah.
so that's not something it's hard for me. I'm not well equipped to answer it just because I've never self-published myself.
I mean, I think, yeah, if I, let's say, I mean, it's not so different, however, than if you were, say, traditionally published and be published. I think you just ask your friends to buy it and hope for the best, but it's just very hard for self-published books to go far. I mean, it's just, you put it out on the internet and then, I mean, there have to be we'll have to think about it more, I think.
I mean, I think one thing you can do is if it's on Amazon, right, you can have people review it. You can make sure people know about it, say, hey, can you read it? Can you write up a review? Can you put it on Amazon? You know, you can send out, certainly you can do your own, you can post about it on social media, you can, send out a letter about your book over email to your friends and your family, and you can certainly tell them about the book that way. It's very hard to publicize something you've written unless you already have authentic relationships established with readers, right? So even if it's your first book, if you are actively supporting other writers on social media, it's very easy to say, hey, can you review this book? Can you share this link? And if you've built a relationship with them, oftentimes people will be happy to do that. If you don't do that groundwork first, though, it is very, very hard as any author, whether you are self-published or not, to then say, can you share this, right? Like I get a lot of messages on social media, as I'm sure you do, Kiran, people I have never met before who have never made any contact with me say, can you tweet this? And it's about a book that they published, whether self-published or not. I'm not going to do that because I have to know something about the writer. I have to know something about the quality of the writing to share it, right? So you have to establish these relationships first before you actually rely on them.
Yes, and I think sometimes even what is, say, your first self-published book could then be that platform for you to then start doing that, if anything. So that might be something to consider now. Maybe find writers who are similar to you in style, interests, etc. Say, I also wrote, this is a book I happen to publish. Are you interested in this? Maybe we can work, do things to each other, to help each other. And we can also perhaps, and get more readers, get more, whether on your Twitter, your Instagram, your Facebook, and your Amazon reviews, as Anjali said, is very important. But just building up a little bit more presence for that book and then maybe using it as part of the conversation as you approach maybe publishers later. Because if you can sell maybe a few thousand copies of that later, that can be impressive when you then have to then approach a proper publisher later on. So again, don't see it as just the end all be all, but maybe this is a step in the right direction.
How do you want, share something, who's your famous, which author would be your mentor if you had a choice of that?
Oh God, it is like from all of history or just of all who are living?
living or dead.
Oh God.
Your mentor, the person you would, if they were there or not, there's
so many, Virginia Woolf, Oscar Wilde. I'm thinking also of the ones who are fun, like Oscar would just be fun to hang out with. He'd just be good for a party, he'd just be good for a party as well. But,
I would love Toni Morrison as a writing mentor. That would be amazing. Arundhati Roy, who writes book fiction, and she writes a lot of political stuff, which I do. So that would be phenomenal. I mean, I've been very lucky in my life in that my writing community has often involved members of people who have supported me tremendously, who have published books before me, who have very informally acted as mentors to me. Valerie Boyd is one of them. But there are so many others, writers who have said, Jennifer Baker now is a senior editor at a major house, but before just always propping up my writing, sharing it online. So I am lucky in that I have been very loved and supported by many people who have been in this industry longer than me, who have been more successful than I have been, saying, hey, how can I help get you to where you want to go on this journey?
How would you advise a young adult in the same way, like, if they are starting to write, like, who should they be looking at?
It's interesting because now I started to get those emails that I do like, which are from like young Indian or Indian American writers who ask me, can you mentor me? Can you help me get published? Or can you teach me more? Some of them are obnoxious and not like the younger Indian American writers, but some are just like completely like just help me without any thought of who you are, but then other people really do, like they've learned about you and they're interested in you, and then I love getting those emails, and then I talk to them on the phone. It's this weird thing because I'm a youngster myself, so part of me is like, when are we talking about, like, no, I'm the one that's supposed to be the quote unquote mentor, so I have to also keep that kind of fake kind of professionalism. But there's that part of me that when I tell, well, first you have to really hone that to the need of that individual writer, because we cannot speak abstractly. Each individual writer has his or her own or their own way of framing their world, their literature, the idea of writing. So usually I listen to them first and I ask them, like, what are you writing about? Where are you from? Like all these just typical framework questions. And then afterwards, based on how that person is, I would then give them advice. But it would be hard to give a generic, unnamed youth adult advice, I think, unless I know more about their background and what they're trying to say.
I think it can be very helpful for all writers, especially young writers, to follow authors that they like on social media. You will be amazed at how many free tips that authors give on their Instagram page, their TikTok, their Twitter about writing. And then when you start following them, you will actually end up meeting and building relationships with other writers of your age who you can then connect with on social media, and who can then maybe even be part of an online writing group. Start a writing group at your school, as part of your cultural organization for young writers. It's another way to get involved, to share work, to encourage one another to keep writing. Luckily, because of social media, there are just so many ways to now meet other writers in your age group if that's important to you. And you can connect with them and encourage each other in your work.
All right, this might be the last question since we have to wrap up in 5 minutes. What is, and I'm going to add 2 questions and make it one. Favorite movie and what gives you great joy?
Oh God, those are very difficult questions. Great joy, a great connection in the process. When you feel a deep, like a good moment with another human being, that gives you great joy. When you create that spark of connectivity. Favorite movie is really hard to say. It changes every year. And what pantheon of movies as well? Do you want like a movie from Hindi cinema, Kannada cinema?
Pick a movie that
that gives
you can watch it
joy.
again and again.
Well, usually I also watch a little bit like a critic. So, like if it's a movie like Mughal Asam, I'm thinking about the beauty of the cinematography and how all these different scenes are combining very, beautifully to create a greater story. But then watch for joy, that's harder. I don't know.
Well, that's on a rewind, like, okay, I'm going to go and, people always talk about Love Actually. We watch it all the time and it's like, okay, what's that?
For me, maybe a TV show, like maybe something like Futurama. Maybe something like Futurama, which is kind of fun and it's fun to laugh at.
Okay. What about
So I will talk about 3 movies that I watched in the past week, because answering the question, generally I could go on and on about so many movies. But I want to talk about 3 movies that really, it helps them if you support them now, because they're playing now. One is One Night in Miami, which was phenomenal. And these are all very sort of meditative, contemplative movies now that I think about it. The second one was Nomadland. Absolutely phenomenal movie with Frances McDormand. And the third one was Minari. I just watched that Friday night, about a Korean American family who moves to Arkansas to start a farm. And the family is kind of going through all of this emotional and psychological upheaval at the same time. So there's that tension. There are 3 examples of excellent storytelling with very simple plots, but deeply developed characters. But what great joy. Of course, writing brings me great joy, but spending time in person with family and friends is a big thing. I feel very deprived of it. I'm so grateful we can actually sit within arm's distance from one another today. But spending time in person with people, and that's what I want to do when this whole COVID mess is over.
Travel as well. That
Yes,
also brings a
travel.
lot of joy, going to a random country.
I understand for you. That's for a lot of us, actually.
Yeah.
Traveling, I think, is a big thing. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you both coming
Thank
and participating in our first author series for IACA. And it's back to you, Chand.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so
We had a lot
much.
of
Such an
fun.
honor.
would like to thank Ritu, Anjali, Kiran for this entertaining and educational session. I think it's a good start, and based on the response we have received on Zoom and Facebook Live, and also questions raised by the viewers of the program, is very encouraging. I think we look forward to other sessions in the month of March and April. And I would like to use this opportunity again to tell about the forthcoming programs. Next Saturday, March 7th, we have yoga therapy with Satya Soman. Then March 13th, Women's Conference or International Women's Day. That is from 2 to 4 p.m. on March 13th. After that, we have Youth Talent Show organized by IACA. People with multiple talents can participate and win prizes. Then April 24th, we have Rhythms of India, display of rhythms from India. And then Festival of India in August, Atlanta Indian Idol in September. And we hope to see all of you at this event. And again, I would like to thank my team, Amit, who was the host for today's event, and Ritu, moderator, and both Anjali and Kiran. Then I also have other team members, Josna Hegde, who created graphics and kind of helped in promotion, and Bini Desai, and she's the go-getter behind this, reaching people in England, India, to get audience for this program. Then Vijay Chandrasekhar, and also my executive committee members, Rani Singh, Chaitanya Bhat, Geetanjali Talukdar, and Dhananjay Gupta. So it's a wonderful session we had, and thank you all for attending today's session. Now I transfer this to host Amit Arora. And I have to thank him, it's the technical brain behind, made it seamless. So we got good reviews, and he's going to help us in the coming sessions too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chan. Thank you. That was an engrossing session, and I hope you all enjoyed as much as I did. Thanks for the leadership of Chan Akirini, who's the brains behind this, and he has taken all the initiation to get this program to us. Once again, thank you. With that, we close this session. Thank you all, and hope to see you in the next program.